Morning, Eric.
Well, good morning, everybody. Saturday morning, and we are here to do our District 8 Cracker Barrel. This is something that we were kind of forced into doing last year virtually, and it turned out to be very well attended on the live feed, and then after the fact, everybody that watched the video afterwards. So we decided to go with that same process this year and be able to cover all of District 8 here in about an hour's time. So joining me is Senator Casey Crabtree and Representatives Marley Weezy and Randy Gross. Welcome to the three of you. Thanks for taking time out of your Saturday to answer some questions with us. I think we'll start with, if we start with Senator Crabtree and just little few minutes to talk about committees, bills, things like that you've been working on out in here.
Yeah, well, thanks, Eric. It's been a busy year so far out in Pierre. I think we have a total of 570 bills. The majority of those coming from the House side. I think that is the most number of bills we have seen in 24 years. And in that year, I think they had 572. So we're right up against it. So it's been it's a busy year, and there's a lot of work going on in committees. I get to sit on 3 different committees. I sit on as a member of State Affairs, and I chair Senate Commerce and Energy, and then also a member of Transportation, the Transportation Committee. And so all 3 of those have been real busy, and there's a lot going on. I think also just from things that are happening in District 8, we probably have more things happening that are focused on our district than we did last year. And Dakota State's got a tremendous amount of activity happening out there. In State Affairs last week, we heard about their big project, which is a $90 million total project, 2/3 of that being privately funded, and doubles our student pipeline through the cybersecurity programs, creates 400 to 500 jobs that pay over $100,000 each, and $100 million worth of annual activity. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased on this, but I think it's the biggest economic development project that we have heard in South Dakota. So that's an exciting thing that's happened. So I think amongst the 3 of us, we've got a lot of committee work and then a lot that's happening here in District 8. I know when we get to Randy, who's on appropriations, they are doing a tremendous amount of work, and I'm sure they'll share that.
Thank you. It's been a busy year for me too on a lot of different committees. I served on the Summer Marijuana Study Committee, and so there's been a lot of bills that have come out of that. We get a lot of mail about, it passed by 70%. We need to set up a program, and we're committed to doing that. But we'd like to see it really safe. We'd like to see it regulated, and we get a lot of input from law enforcement and different things. And so we just are trying to make it as safe as we can. There's a list of diagnoses that you can get your medical marijuana card for. And it seems to me like all of those diagnoses are one that you'd want to be under a doctor's care already. And I heard from the DOH that there are 81 medical providers already registered with South Dakota. So there are quite a number of them. But we've had bills about, whether municipalities or counties should be, forced to have a dispensary. Should they have some input into maybe your county wasn't in favor of the marijuana? Should they still have to have a dispensary? So we're trying to work through all of those things. And some of those bills are just starting to go over to the Senate side too. They've been sending some our way. So we'll be talking about that a lot. We had Senator Rounds come in and talk to our Republican caucus last week. And after he got done scaring us all about the Russian-Ukraine situation, he talked a lot about Dakota State and how this $30 million that they're asking for, would help in the cybersecurity area and how important that is in our world right now. So it was good to hear that he was really thinking that was something important from his side too. I've been working on a number of bills, different things. I have a prescription drug repository bill that I've been working on is passed, and it'll pass over to the Senate this week for them to take up. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now at this point in the session.
Well, Randy, we'll turn it over to you. I know you've been a little under the weather, so I appreciate you taking time. Maybe talk about some things that have been happening on your end.
Thank you. You're correct. This is my first outing after having been diagnosed with COVID 15 days ago. I've been in quarantine, but I'm doing much better. Looking forward to hopefully being back live in Pierre. I've not missed any sessions. Thank goodness to technology, and our little sessions here have been examples of that over the years. And now we finally got good live home internet in our house, and so I was never missed a committee meeting during the last 2 weeks. Never missed a floor vote. Maybe disagreed with a few people on a few votes at times, but that happens when we're there too. Yeah, and I serve on appropriations, as was mentioned, and it's been crazy. It seems like the more money we have, the more asks we have, the more big hands that are out for it. And that doesn't mean they're bad asks, but there just isn't enough money for all the good asks because there are so many. I'll second what was said about excuse me, DSU and Madison and what's going on there. You know, there's lots of issues in academia at all levels, but DSU is a shining light within South Dakota and within our regental system and within our country as far as the cybersecurity. And so it's something I think we can all work towards and build on, and will be real positive, not only for our District 8 community here, but for the greater state of South Dakota. It's going to continue to draw quality jobs, quality people to the whole area that we will become one of a very limited number of national hubs of cybersecurity. We already are, but it's going to take off like you haven't seen before. I think we're very fortunate in who we've got administering things there. We've built a tremendous reputation that will do nothing but go forward. Within appropriations, this next week too is going to be particularly important because this is the week where we will start getting our budget numbers, our revenue numbers for the year we're not wrapping up, but we're getting more than halfway through because we ended June. But we will do our revenue setting for readjusting our 22 numbers and also do our budget projection for our 2023 numbers, our ongoing future revenue as well. And everything we've seen, sales tax revenues, which is the driving force, like 2/3 of it, continues to be extremely strong. So that what it will do is create a lot of one-time dollars here for this year we're wrapping up that weren't built into the base budget and will be available for one-time projects, which is a good thing as long as we spend it wisely. But then the debate becomes, how cautious do you get going forward into 23? How long can this sales growth hang on? Because obviously a lot of it is fed by federal money being pushed out to the states. And it also results in inflation. So there's trade-offs. You have more dollars, but there's more day-to-day demands. All you have to do is look at the gas pumps and the grocery stores and most everything else we buy. Rents go up. Interest rates are going to go up, where there's no doubt about that. Other committees I serve on are Military and Veterans Affairs, which is always an honor, being a veteran myself. We meet at the call of the chair and have had a few bills this year. Hopefully we're going to finally get the road to the Veteran Cemetery north of Sioux Falls paved this summer. We have some money planned for that. And I also serve on Government Operations and Audit, to chair that on behalf of the House. We typically don't meet during session, but have met on the interim, and we'll meet as soon as session is over on a regular basis throughout the summer. So lots on the plate, lots of things to talk about. Looking forward to visiting, answering questions.
Eric, I would just briefly add that the Appropriations Committee is dealing with a historic amount of money here. So that is stressing that process because it wasn't necessarily built for this kind of dollars, and those dollars are federal funds that are coming down. And so I would, to both my colleagues in the House on that committee and the Senate, would just say thanks for all the work they're doing. There's lots of work that's come on so far, but we know that there's a lot of dollars that they're going to be looking at in the next 4 weeks. And I also add something that both Representative Gross, Representative Weezy, and I worked on last year was focused on rural infrastructure. And we've seen some bills on that come through already this year. It's been real focused on that. Everybody knows that that our rural roads are in tough shape. We don't have a lot of resources at the county and township level. And I know that's been fun to work with my 2 colleagues in the House on that, and some other folks as we worked on really on small structures. So we're talking bridges, culverts, and just a data-driven approach. And so we worked on that together. That's been good. We had a chance to see that bill in the Senate this week, where we had taken some feedback from the counties and townships and adjusted the timelines. And that did not get a no vote on the Senate side. I don't know if it received one on the House side, but it seems to be pretty well received.
Yeah, Casey's absolutely right. That's something we've pushed at it as a team for some time now. And unfortunately, the frustration at the local level has done nothing but get worse the last couple of years, particularly now that inflation has kicked in and the supply chain issues for building and construction materials and the delivery of those materials and stuff. I noticed just in our Flanders paper the other day that this what's generally referred to as the Christensen Road Bridge, or the Christensen Bridge, which has been on the big improvement grant list now for a couple of years. The bid has gone in that waiting period from 1.8 million up to 2.4 million, and or even more on that. And it's just, the county had entered into an agreement and they were going to pick up the difference. Well, now the difference is so much greater. Where does the money come from? They don't have it. And so it almost becomes a starting over position on some of these projects because of the delay. So what looks like big money doesn't go as far as it used to, unfortunately. Our needs across the state are great from the standpoint of roads, bridges, those sorts of infrastructure improvements.
Yeah, I'd like to add too, from my second session on roads and bridges have been something that we just always, everybody agrees that we really need to push some money that direction. And last year, we were only able to acquire $3 million to do this study. And that's always kind of scary because you think, what is $3 million going to do for this study? But it has been a great thing. I've seen the maps, how detailed they are, and they've really done a good job, identifying where this needs to go. And I think they'll be able to prioritize in that way. So I think they really got a good start going, and we want to keep it going.
And that's no mandate from the state aspect. I mean, the counties and townships can participate should they want to. I mean, it makes perfect sense to participate in that. And I think right now on our inventory list of things that are coming in, I believe we have 44 of the 66 counties that have turned something in. And the other ones had other projects going at the time, so they're working on that. And so what I like about it, and I think sort of my colleagues, is that that's given us hard data on what we have for issues out there. And so I think that is what we like. So when we put a dollar number to that going forward, we know that's exactly what we have for the need.
And we've got the tools and the mechanism in place now. All we've got to do is feed the buckets with hopefully some of this federal infrastructure money. And hopefully we can feed it well.
Yeah, and I mean, in the end, and it's pretty obvious, this supports our state's #1 industry, and we're all proponents of that.
Well, great. We'll jump into some questions, and I'll say too that anybody that's watching this on Facebook Live, you can certainly submit questions in the comments. We do have a couple of chamber staff members monitoring those, and they'll get them over to me if they are relevant to our conversation. And also I want to mention too that some of the bills and things like that we're talking about may not have made it out of Senate committee, and so the representatives may not have a whole lot of information on it, and vice versa too. So just know if they don't have any information, then they'll probably say that. Starting off, we'll start with Senator Crabtree and just kind of work around here. First question: the chair of the South Dakota GOP has set a goal to elect all Republicans to the South Dakota legislature. What are your thoughts about all 105 legislators coming from the same party?
Well, thanks for the question, Eric. I mean, the purpose of a political party is to organize to win elections. I mean, that's literally the definition. You know, just because the opposite party, I guess, doesn't value that, I don't understand any negative attack on the Republican Party being organized and trying to win all those seats. In fact, I'd be concerned if the party chair didn't have that as a goal.
Yeah, it's clearly evident from this session so far that we have a wide, diverse view of, even what it means to be Republican or vote Republican. So it's not that we're just all single-mindedly, driving the Republican agenda too. And I agree with Casey that that's what we do. We want to win elections. And we do really good work with the Democrats that are in our respective houses. So I think a variety of views and consensus building with all parties makes for good legislation.
Yeah, I think if I were a Democrat, I'd want my Democrat Party leader to make the same statement, take the same approach, to be positive about controlling events in the future and working towards it. Even as strong as the Republican Party is currently now, the likelihood of it happening, there's a few districts that are just probably not going to go that way. It's always going to be tough. And as you know, things change over time, sometimes slower than others. And the trend certainly has been towards Republicans. So I'm hoping we can gain a few more. But like the others have said, I'm hoping we can continue to work with the good Democrats we have in our bodies and that we work with on a cordial basis, on a daily basis.
Well, good. We'll move into a question on House Bill 1337. And that's meant to protect elementary and secondary students from political indoctrination. What proof is there that this is happening in South Dakota public schools, or that it's happening is an imminent threat? So it's House Bill 1337. We'll start with Representative Weezy.
Thank you. I heard part of that bill last week. I sit on a different committee that meets at the same time, so I was there for part of it. But to me, I think perception for some of that bill is that it limits teachers from teaching on both sides of an issue, and that's not my understanding of it. I don't think that's happening in the schools that I'm familiar with. We want healthy debate on the facts of both sides of an issue, and I see that happening in our schools. From testimony in the House Ed last week, there have been some problems in some South Dakota schools and other places around the country, and we like to address that before it becomes a bigger problem here. I think we've all seen on national news how it has been a problem in some places. And there's a lot of legislators that if it's not happening right here, we don't want to look at that. But I think it makes sense to start that discussion here. And I think HB 1337 was really changed, amended. It's not the same bill that we started out with at all. So let's take another look at it next week.
I think
Representative Gross.
Marley summarized it very well. We have had situations on right in Flanders where positions have been presented. Students have spoken differently of those positions and been told to keep their opinions to themselves. And this has divided the school and the community there in Flanders, and it's been difficult. And I think this is an effort to level the communications and be fair with both sides of the issue in dealing with the discussion about anything controversial. Thank you.
Senator Crabtree, I know it's right now a House bill. Anything to add?
I think my House colleagues have probably looked at that a lot closer than I have before it makes its way through the process. I would just go back to talking about education as a whole. Representative Gross, Representative Weezy, and I met with the District 8 school administrators and council members, board members earlier this year before session started. And wasn't a lot of discussion on this. I mean, it seems to me like the number one issue that our local educators are talking about is the 6% increase for education that Governor Noem put in her budget. And I think there's I think that is an area of focus from our schools, maybe more so than this piece of legislation.
Yes, and I think the 6% is, well, I hesitate to say 100%. It's very universally supported, and looking more and more important as inflation eats up a bigger chunk of it. So I fully expect the 6% to be approved.
I can only speak on the behalf of our Senate side. I think that's where a majority of our members are too, and I mean, inflation is, Randy's spot on inflation. It's eating up everything. So it's going to be a challenging time. I think the 6% makes a lot of sense today. It's going to be challenging going forward as we look at this. So we've got to have some long-term views on how we can make sure that we support our educators and our educational systems as we go forward.
The 6% raises an interesting discussion too, because we talk about it for the big three: education, health providers, and state employees. But what we don't realize that within education, at least particularly in higher education, there's a block of employees who don't qualify for that because they get their funding from other sources. Faculty members who are on grants or federal positions and stuff, and they have to come up with their 6% through other funds someplace else. And then they get the budget approved for the universities, and 2 months later the regents meet and raise tuition to come up with that. That doesn't look good, and we're working on a methodology of funding that up front so they don't raise tuition to do that. They get treated like others. And we'll also have some state employees too, some game fish and parks people who are funded through the license fees, that kind of stuff. That's considered other funding, doesn't qualify for the 6% state across the board funding, and they have to come up with it as well. We like a little more transparency in the system when we're going to talk about 6% for the big three. It truly is 6% for the big three without any surprises later on. It doesn't affect K through 12 quite as much though.
When we just on that topic of the 6%, we did have a question that was submitted on the Facebook live stream. Is the 6% guaranteed for teacher pay, or can they go off the 2017 standard?
Well, the thing to remember is the state legislature, the state does not set teacher pay. The state funds schools. And under the Blue Ribbon Task Force, the state puts money from that sales tax increase into the state teacher funding. And right now our teachers are at 50th in the state. I've written this in my articles in the paper a couple different times. But the schools are funded at 39th. And so the question is, why the difference between 39 and 50? Obviously, there's a variety, some valid reasons and some not so valid. Our Secretary of Education has told us that 75% of the districts have honored the intent of the Blue Ribbon Task Force. 25% have made some other choices. Some of the other choices were necessary and appropriate. And there is a waiver process. But what it amounted to is 85% of the money that was received from that by the schools from that sales tax increase was to be put towards teacher pay. I probably just muddied it more, but the bottom line is teacher pays at 50%, school funding not 50%, at 50th. School funding is at 39th. And the difference is the responsibility of the local school districts, not the state.
So I think that probably answers the next question that came through, that is the 6% increase for education for salaries, or is it a general increase to the school's aid formula?
It's generally for salaries, but we as a state do not set salaries.
Okay. I think we'll move on to our next topic. If we have time and there's other questions about the education formula, we'll certainly try and get back to it. But
If I could, Eric, let me refer back to Bill 1080, HB 1080, which passed a week or so ago, that renewed or added to the timeline for the continuation of the reporting of that teacher pay tracking mechanism from the Blue Ribbon Task Force. Continued that process forward so the data would be there to continue to monitor the schools that are doing well and those that are struggling to do what is expected at times.
I would add to that, Eric, that HB 1080 was heard on the Senate floor, so it passed through the House, passed through Senate Education, and the debate occurred last week on the Senate floor, and some questions were asked, and so the Senate Prime is working on trying to define those. And I think that the real spirit is to make sure that we are getting that funding to our teachers, and we just want to make sure that we are doing that in the right way. I think. And collectively, that's where we're both the House and the Senate are at.
Yes.
okay. Well, let's move to the next one, and we'll start with Representative Gross. What is your position on Medicaid expansion?
I have mixed feelings on Medicaid expansion. We get good indications that the federal government will pick up a large portion of the tab. If that's the case, that addresses many of the issues. The problem with those type of indications on federal funding of it is there's usually a drop off at some point when it becomes a state's responsibility. I know there's a bill out there that has some appeal to me that says we should go ahead and initiate Medicaid expansion and enter into and draft the bill such that if at any time the federal funding of that Medicaid expansion is discontinued or reduced, then all bets are off again and we can start over. Because the cliff that potentially occurs becomes a very large expense for the state. And we're not going to be assumedly flush with money like we are for years, 3 or 4 years down the road. If we have to come up with that kind of money, where do we look? Where's 50% of our budget go now? Education. You can't pull a nickel and a dime from here or there to balance a cliff like that. You're going to have to be digging in deep to some pretty big programs to make up for the difference if the state has to pick up a big difference.
I agree with Randy for the most part. I haven't been in favor in the past of Medicaid expansion, and it's just because of that federal funding piece where we can see, large amounts of cash being flowing into the state right now, but that certainly is going to end at some time, and we honestly just don't know what the federal government will do after we expand. So,
well, my thoughts on this are pretty similar. My trust in the federal government is pretty low, and especially in some of their long-term processes or long-term commitments. And I just question whether or not they'll be able to fulfill the things that they say they would be able to fulfill for the long term. The thing I would say about it is that the public will get to vote on this. I mean, that's on the ballot. Everybody's voice will be heard on this. And so everybody's vote counts the same as Representative Gross, Representative Weezy, and my vote does on this. And so we're going to get a chance real soon to see where the public is at on this, and we'll work from there after hearing their voice.
Eric, if I may too, that brings me back to a question from the email I thought I might get asked next was position on Amendment C. And because it kind of ties in a little bit. Amendment C, I think, is a good idea. For years, our Constitution requires that if the legislature is spending money on long-term projects, it takes a 2/3 vote. Yet we've had a process where through citizens' initiatives, we can spend those same large amounts of money with a 50% vote. And Amendment C requires that to be 60%, still not 2/3, but a lot closer to setting a level playing field for making large financial decisions on behalf of them that impact the entire state. And so I think Amendment C is well thought out, that it makes everybody think about the longer term financial impacts of things that sound good on the surface sometimes, as long as we don't have to think about paying for them.
And I believe that's initiatives that deal with over $10 million in funding. So it's not, you know.
There is a threshold on that, but Amendment C says if it's going to cost over $10 million, then it takes a 60% vote to pass. If it costs over $10 million to happen in the legislature on a regular bill or regular legislative process, it would take a 67% vote to actually pass it.
Yeah, I agree with what Representative Gross talked about there in the 2/3 threshold that we have set at the legislature and have held for years and years and years. So when there's appropriations going to be happening or a tax increase, that's the minimum bar that you have to reach. So I think moving that up to 60% makes perfect sense. I mean, South Dakota, it's just in the spirit of every South Dakotan, I think, to a degree, is that we have built a low tax state that allows for personal freedoms. And so if we're going to bring a ballot measure that increases the tax or spends some significant dollars, a little bit higher threshold seems to match with how we've governed our state for years and years and years.
Right, and we kind of jumped into Amendment C, and that's going to be something that'll be on the ballot coming up, that the voters will be able to vote on. Let's kind of move into marijuana, medical, recreational. Senator Crabtree, if you want to jump in on this one first, do you feel it is necessary to further limit medical marijuana when voters overwhelmingly approved it?
Well, thanks for the question, Eric. And I first will thank Representative Weezy for her work on the summer interim study. Those things are not easy. I participated in one in workforce housing this year. It is a lot of hours and a lot of time spent on studying an industry. So I thank Representative Weezy and the number of colleagues that we had that did that work over the summer. And so I would look back at if we look at medical marijuana last year, my votes were to support the establishment of that industry. And I believe have all been that way since. Now to set up some sensible guidelines that summer study has come up with has been really where my vote has been. Let's deliver on what the people voted on. I believe in that and work towards that starting last year. As soon as we got into session, that's where I'm at this year. And I would just honestly, I think it's more of this question probably more for those that were on the summer study.
I kind of stated my position when I made my opening remarks too, but I think proponents of the medical marijuana bill think that it's being limited, where I believe we're just setting, parameters to make it safe and regulated. Like I said, there's been a number of doctors that have signed on to be registered to deliver cards. And, we talked a lot this week about getting somebody that's registered in the state, but it's called Presto Doctor. And they can give out cards. Those are the kind of things that we want to really take a long, hard look at. Who do we want dispensing this? And they have to have a patient-doctor relationship. That's very important to us. So there's a number of things that we think we can do. And like I said, we do listen to our law enforcement, and we've talked extensively with states around us that have had this law in place for 20 years in Colorado. And when we talk to some of those people about law enforcement and their health and their ER docs, there's just a lot of things we'd like to put in place so we don't go down the same path as some of them have. That have had it for years. So that's kind of where I sit on that.
Thank you. I would second what Casey and Marley have said. I was not on the task force, but My approach has been to honor the vote, but also honor in terms of treating it as other medical conditions are treated, other prescriptions. It's not an outlier that needs an allowance to stand by itself. If it truly is a medical product, it should be able to be managed within the medical product world like all the others, prescriptions and that sorts of things. There are no other prescriptions that I'm aware of where, for instance, you can sell your prescription to somebody else or trade off your prescription to somebody else. And things like that just don't fit to me within proper medical methodology.
Well, another question that relates to marijuana, we just kind of touched on medical marijuana. Representative Weezy, we'll start with you. Question is, do you support recreational marijuana?
That's a much more difficult one for me. You know, it has been struck down in the courts mostly because of the single subject rule. So I think we're going to have another chance to look at that, whether the legislature looks at it or it gets put on the ballot again. I don't believe that recreational marijuana is going to do anything to enhance the South Dakota's lives. So I'm sitting against it at this point.
Representative Gross?
I agree with Representative Weezy. I'm not a supporter of recreational marijuana. Everything we've heard that I've learned from those who were involved in the summer studies and talked in detail from Colorado, with people from Colorado, Washington, other states who have had recreational programs in effect for some time. The bottom line is they've seen it as a net cost to society. If you tax it high enough, the black market comes in and undercuts everything. If you don't charge much tax, you have little revenue to deal with so many of the social issues that go with it. And there are many more that are publicized. So I have trouble supporting recreational marijuana. I think we do need a good medical program, but we don't need recreational.
Senator Crabtree?
Well, I might vary just slightly from my colleagues on this one. You know, just when that was on the ballot, I did not vote for it. I was a no on this. And I think I wrote about this, shared about this last year. I understand where the vote is at and where the people are at. And I'm going to try to continue to support what folks voted for there. And last year, I think there was several opportunities where I voted for something that decriminalized a small amount. So that is also something that we will see, I think, again on the ballot, and we'll also see it again in the legislature. There is a bill in Senate Commerce and Energy for that. We are probably a week or so out before that one is heard, but that'll have a fair debate, and we'll see where that goes. But certainly a complex issue with many varying viewpoints.
We do have a couple others that have been submitted, and they deal with maybe defining the difference between a couple of different topics. And I'll just read the question, and whomever wants to jump in first certainly can. The public voted for legalized marijuana, and the legislators seems to fight against the will of the people. Why would the Medicaid vote be any different?
Medicaid or medical, are you talking about?
The question says Medicaid.
Are you talking about expansion?
I'm assuming that that's where the question is coming from. The public voted for legalized marijuana, and the legislator seems to fight against the will of the people. Why would the Medicaid vote be any different?
Well, I would just address it briefly. I wouldn't say that the legislature is fighting against it at all. I view it differently, and it depends probably on which chamber you're in on where that viewpoint is at. I would go back to the exact process though, Eric, and that is ballot measures. And last year, I think I support ballot measures as far as a process for the people to have their voice heard. And last year, we spent a great deal of time and passed some really, I think, smart bills that set that process up better. I do not think that it was, a great process to have it go through, for instance, recreational marijuana. It goes through the process while people are telling the folks that are proponents of that, hey, you're probably violating the single subject rule. So, that was known early on where that thing might end up. And instead of addressing that on the front end, the way the process works is it went all the way through that process, drug everybody along, and then ends up in the Supreme Court. And I don't think that's fair to the folks that put the ballot measure on. I don't think that's fair to people that support it. And it wasn't right. And so there was a number of bills that we worked on last year. That came through Senate State Affairs and they were successful, that put some more, that allowed for some certainty in that process on the front end. And so I would say that the ones that you're seeing now, I think that process is different and it's better and it's improved for the public and that certainty that they will get on that. So to address that question, I would say, I think the process has changed for the better.
I think Casey summarized it very well. Yes or no, it will be a lot cleaner vote this time. Whether you agree or disagree, the result is a lot more definable and understandable.
If the question means, recreational passed by 51%, if they pass Medicaid expansion by 51%, are we going to try to, manipulate it? And I think it's a totally different animal. I don't think it's the same.
Okay. Going back to Amendment C. If it is so important that we change the referral process, why is the vote in June during the primary and not in November when all referrals are voted on?
Address that one unless you guys.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
I remember.
So I think Amendment C, just so everybody understands, Amendment C will be voted on in the primary versus in the general. And to that, to opponents of having that, I would say, what's the big opposition? I mean, turn out for the primary. Turn out for the primary. There's primaries all over. They're going to be well publicized. Turn out for the primary and have your voice heard, whether you're a pro or against. Show up in June and vote on it.
Well said.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. Something going back to education and the funding mechanism. And also, I believe this is probably coming back to HB 1337. So the state legislature feels it can require what is said or taught in classrooms, but they cannot require an increase in funding to be directed to a specific expense. Can you explain why the line gets drawn and where it gets drawn?
Well, we've already talked about, that we fund the schools and they decide where the money goes as far as teacher salaries. And, like I said, there's a perception of 1337 that we're trying to keep something from being taught, and it's just not the way I read the bill. I don't think that's what it does.
And local control is an interesting subject because it's an easy phrase to throw out. But to me, if anybody, whether it's a school or a business or anything else, wants 100% local control, they need to be 100% responsible for their own inputs as well, their revenues and their stuff. And so the local control philosophy is actually, in reality, a balance, because the state puts in half of our state budget into funding schools. And so obviously, when you put that much into the schools, you have a voice in some of the things that are said, setting standards and policies and guidelines. That's not done in a vacuum.
I would just say that I believe our school boards and our administrators work very closely with those teachers. And so I think funding that at a school board level or at a school level makes sense. I mean, they know what's best in their particular district. And I mean, I'm a little biased here because my kids both go to Madison Central, and I think they do a fantastic job there. But I meet with schools and talk to school administrators and teachers, across our district, and I'm proud of the work that they're doing, and want to help fund that as best we can, and give our teachers the support they need, and our next generation the tools they need to be successful. And I think the way we have that set up now is maybe the way that those schools also want it too. And so I hope it gets to the teachers, but I also know that they have other responsibilities. They have to fund as well. There's other staff there too. So it's a complex issue, and we continue to work on it.
Complex issue is a good way to put it, because we're seeing some great examples in District 8 now of some different ends of the spectrum. We've got the Oldham, Ramona, Rutland discussions that are in process now for the last year plus, and apparently continuing to proceed in discussion, dealing with issues of some of our smaller schools and how they handle that. And even on the teacher funding, there's exceptions, there's waivers that are allowed under exceptions. If you have, as I said, a couple of the tenured teachers retire, it's going to lower your average teacher salary pretty significantly in a small school district, in a Ramona or Rutland. If you have a couple retire in Madison who are higher paid teachers, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to hurt like it is in a small district in terms of your average teacher salary. And so there are waivers that are allowed when that happens, to say, okay, here's why it happened. It's justifiable. It'll correct itself going forward as the new replacement teachers generate the tenure and experience and higher salaries. But it still doesn't affect the bottom line issue of a smaller school struggling to cover all the bases they need to also. So one size fits all just doesn't work. And that's why you see so many variables come into play in the discussions on it as well.
Well, good. I think we'll kind of wrap things up here. Good discussion. Thank you for those that submitted questions ahead of time and during our live streaming today. To close things up, I'll open it up to the three legislators if they have anything to close with. I do also want to say, they not just these three representatives and senator, but all of them in the all 105 of them can be easily contacted, reached out. Their emails, their phone numbers are on the Legislative Research Council's website. So if there are questions that we didn't get to, or questions that the public has going forward, certainly I would recommend getting on the Legislative Research Council's website and contacting them. But to close things up, if each of you has a few things to say. Marley raised her hand, so we better go to her.
I did. Well, I should have started out with the great day that we had here in Madison for the gymnastics. They won their 21st state championship, and they did it with one of our gymnasts being injured just on warm-ups. And so we had just a great example of what a team is, how all these girls had to step up where they didn't know that they'd be competing that day, and just in a moment's notice had to step up. And so it was a great day for us. And I just want to say thank you for setting this up. And I really appreciate all of the mail that I get from on both sides of any issue, because it really does help us to get the pulse of where people are feeling. We hear from a lot of different people, and it's very helpful in what we do. So I just want to thank everybody listening and for the questions and comments.
Representative Gross or Senator Crabtree, anything to close up with?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for, as a for sponsoring this, putting it on. It's been great. I will regret that this is my last session representing District 8. It's been a pleasure working on behalf of Lake, Minor, and Sanborn counties, in addition to Moody. And if I'm reelected, I'll have Moody and a good chunk of Minnehaha County going forward, so I'll get to see some of the people. But certainly Madison has been a wonderful community. At DSU, as I said earlier, a shining star in our whole regental system within the state. So many good things going on there, and I'll always be proud of the fact that I hopefully contributed something positive to that effort. It's also been wonderful getting to know folks in the smaller communities out west in Howard and in Woonsocket. Again, Woonsocket's not even going to be part of 8 anymore either. So it got chopped up that way, but another wonderful community with a lot of good homegrown people there who feel very strongly about the strengths that those local communities have. And I think that's a strength of South Dakota in general, no matter where we go. Thank you.
Well, Eric, I want to say thank you to you guys as well. I know this is unconventional to do this via Zoom, but when you had explained to us how many more views and how many more people see it through this medium, I'm glad we can find a way to get the message out of the things that are happening in the legislature. You know, there's some big things that we didn't talk about that, you know, weren't on the questions list that we're working on. One of them is the water infrastructure bills. There's 2 of them that are separate. One of them is $600 million and one of them is $60 million. I think that $600 million one is the largest single appropriations bill in our state's history. And that went through Senate State Affairs last week and arrives over in joint appropriations this week. And so I don't know when they'll hear that, but that is a big deal that's happening out there. And it's not flashy because it's infrastructure, so it doesn't get all the headlines. But that is a big thing that affects our entire state, that affects our municipalities, and that affects our rural water systems. And so there's some big things out there that I think folks should look at. And should, you know, that's one of them. I would say the infrastructure related to workforce housing is another big one that folks should look at. There's a number of things like that that just aren't flashy stuff, but they're the hard work that Representative Gross, Representative Weezy, and I work on all day, every day, and in our 40-day session to try to get something out that's good for our state. So I'd encourage people to look at all those, not just the ones that make the headlines. And I just appreciate the fact that you allow this medium, and I hope folks reach out to us. We're really easy to find. All of our information's on the LRC website, social media, etc. So please reach out. Let us know what we're doing right, and let us know what we're doing wrong. We'd like to hear both. So appreciate your time, and thanks again.
You bet. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to everybody during the week.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.